Welcome back to the Radio.com Sports Fantasy Football Show. For another week, we will get you everything you need to know. Waiver wire pickups, streamers, and stealthy starts. What's that? Jay Gruden got fired. Well, that should solve all their problems. What's up, everybody? I'm Steven Andrus. I promised no Washington players and waiver wire pickups for this week. And honestly, it's pretty ugly out there on the waiver wire. So pick them up for this week is a guy who is just an attrition play. Injuries are going to give this player an opportunity. It's Giants third-string running back Jonathan Hilliman. Thursday at the New England Patriots, a brutal matchup, but among running backs available on waivers owned in less than 50% of leagues, he's really the only viable starter out there. Again, takes on the Patriots, but with Saquon Barkley out, a 4 to 8 week ankle injury, he should be out again this week. Wayne Gallman suffered a concussion in week 5. That leaves the undrafted free agent out of Rutgers, and volume and opportunity are greater than talent at running back in fantasy football. And Hilliman did have 10 touches in relief Sunday in week 5 after Gallman suffered that concussion. The next waiver wire pickup at running back is a precaution, and it is the top handcuff in fantasy football, in my opinion. Arizona Cardinals running back Chase Edmonds, the backup to David Johnson. If Johnson were to miss time with a back injury, that means Edmonds would be a running back 1 in week 6, a top 12 running back option. Cliff Kingsbury said after the win against Cincinnati that David Johnson did play through a bad back. More specifically, the reports are that it locked up on him. And again, just a reminder of what the upside is for Edmonds in fantasy football. If DJ were to miss time, look at what he did in just limited touches against Cincinnati. 11 touches for 86 yards and a touchdown with DJ on the bench with that back injury. Chase Edmonds in any week David Johnson is not available as a top 12 running back in fantasy football. There were no wide receivers I felt comfortable with suggesting this week owned in less than 50% of leagues and pick them up. So for the first time, I'm offering a kicker suggestion. I know, this is how ugly it is week 6 on the waiver wire. So my pick 'em up option number 3 is Patriots kicker Mike Nugent. Put it this way, if Stephen Gostkowski was healthy and he was available on your waiver wire, would you pick him up? Absolutely you'd pick him up because you know he's a top 5 fantasy option among kickers. The same applies for Mike Nugent. He's only 12% owned in leagues, and kickers in fantasy are more about who you kick for as opposed to how talented of a kicker you are. It's about who plays in the best offense. And just by playing for the Patriots, Mike Nugent is a top 5 fantasy kicker for the rest of the season. In his debut, he missed an extra point, but he still had 3 more extra points and 2 field goals. This is a guy who any given week can give you double-digit points at the kicker position. Let's move on to the stream team now. These are quarterbacks, tight ends, and defenses owned in less than 50% of leagues that you can not only pick up but start due to the matchup in week number 6. At quarterback, Kirk Cousins of the Minnesota Vikings. I think they may be going to more of a balanced offense from what we saw earlier in the season when it was so run-heavy. Stephon Diggs was unhappy, Adam Thielen was unhappy, and he fed them the rock in week number 5. Last week, 306 yards passing and 2 touchdowns, both to Thielen for Kirk Cousins. That was 20.5 fantasy points. This week, he gets the Philadelphia Eagles secondary. That's allowing more than 20 fantasy points per game to fantasy quarterbacks, despite that outlier game against the Jets' third-string quarterback Luke Falk last week. The Eagles have an elite defensive line, but they're a pass-funnel defense, so I think they move away from Dalvin Cook in this game, pass the ball like they did last week, and Cousins in 4 of 5 games this year has completed 70% of his passes. The next streaming option is a guy who just continues to impress no matter the matchup, Gardner Minshew of the Jacksonville Jaguars. Look at what he's done coming off the bench for Nick Foles after he was injured week 1. All of this guy does is put up fantasy points. 16-plus points every single week this season for Minshew. And the Mustache Master gets the Saints this week, who have allowed the second most fantasy points to quarterbacks this year at a clip of more than 24 per game. 21 fantasy points last week at Carolina, despite those 3 fumbles for Minshew. I think he's a viable option this week against New Orleans in what could be a shootout. Moving on to streaming tight ends, and Chris Herndon of the New York Jets is off suspension, but is still owned in less than 50% of leagues. So for the second week in a row, I'm telling you to go out and pick this guy up. When he took over as starter for the Jets last year, he was a top 6 tight end from week 6 on for the rest of the season. His suspension is over. He gets Dallas this week. Dallas top 10 in fantasy points allowed to the tight end position. And there's a chance that Sam Darnold will return this week from mono as well after avoiding risking death against the Eagles last week. So Chris Herndon could be a solid streaming option not only this week, but for the rest of the season. Secondly, Rams tight end Gerald Everett is continuing to impress in back-to-back weeks. A big surprise statistically, but with how bad the tight end position is out there, this is a solid option for you to go and pick up. Look at the targets he has in the past 2 weeks. 19 to be exact. In week 5, 7 receptions for 136 yards at Seattle. In week 4, 5 receptions, 44 yards, and a touchdown at home against Tampa Bay. Again, tight end is a wasteland. You could do a lot worse than taking a stab at a tight end in a Sean McVay offense. 2 great options among streaming defenses this week based on the offense that they are playing. The first is the Washington Redskins. Jay Gruden is out, but the Miami Dolphins are in. Washington is going to Miami this week, and this is a matchup between a stoppable force and a movable object, but only one of these teams actually wants to win, and it's Washington, and Vegas agrees. Washington more than a 5-point favorite against Miami, and the Washington D wasn't too bad against the Patriots. 4 sacks and an interception. Miami is allowing 18 fantasy points per game to opposing defenses, most in the league. And the second streaming option for week number 6 is the Dallas Cowboys. If you can't face a defense that's playing the Miami Dolphins, who's the second best option? The New York Jets. And that's who the Cowboys get this week. Statistically, the second best team to go against if you have a fantasy defense. Sam Darnold may be back, but Adam Gase's teams reek of dysfunction. In similar spots against the Giants, Redskins, and Dolphins, the Cowboys defense only allowed 14.7 points per game. They forced 1 turnover per game and had almost 2 sacks per game against those much easier matchups, and certainly the Jets fall into that category. Before we wrap up the show, as always, we have Stealthy starts. These are guys that are owned in most leagues, but typically have not been started in most lineups. And the first is Kansas City running back Damien Williams. In his first game off injury last week, he wasn't all that impressive, didn't put up too many numbers, but when you go inside the box score, that's why he's a sneaky start. Look at what the split was in this backfield for Kansas City with Damien Williams healthy. In week 5 against the Indianapolis Colts, Damien Williams played 56% of snaps. Darrell Williams only played 22% of snaps. LaShawn McCoy only played 22% of snaps. Look at opportunities. What we mean by that, carries plus targets. Damien Williams had 13. LaShawn McCoy had only 2. Darrell Williams, goose egg, 0. So with Damien Williams back, he gets the Texans this week, who are allowing the most receptions to running backs this season. In fact, they're allowing 8 more than the next closest team. Fire up Damien Williams as a stealthy start in week number 6. Among wide receivers, Dallas wideout Michael Gallup doesn't get as much attention as Amari Cooper, but maybe he should in fantasy. He's owned in about 70% of leagues, but was started in less than 5% of leagues last week in his first game back from a knee injury. That needs to change significantly in week 6. Start this guy with confidence. In 3 games this year, he's averaging 6.7 receptions and 113 yards per game. He added a touchdown last week. He has 7+ targets in each game this year. And you may have heard the Jets are not #good at football. That's who he gets this week. Lastly, the Jacksonville Jaguars' blooming young wide receiver DJ Chark. The Charknado is on fire this year with Gardner Minshew at quarterback, but nobody wants to start him. Again, owned in about 70 to 80% of leagues, but started in less than 40% of leagues last week. Start to believe in this guy. The numbers back him up. Last week against Carolina, 8 receptions, 164 yards, and 2 touchdowns. That is incredibly impressive due to the fact that the Panthers came into the game only allowing 197 total passing yards per game, and Chark put up 164 by himself. He gets the Saints up next in Week 6, who are allowing the 7th most fantasy points per week to wide receivers. DJ Chark is a flex option moving forward for the rest of the season. Thank you so much for joining us this week on the Radio.com Sports Fantasy Football Show. My name is Steven Andress. Good luck this week in Week 6 and the rest of the way.